to enter, so please put your business card in the wheel over there, and we'll take care of that toward the end of the session. On that note of love, I also want to give a recognition shout out to our Madam President, Ling Chow, for making this and everything happen for us and her continuous support. We encourage all to ask questions toward the Q&A session toward the end. And our co-host today is Cecilia Wen, who will introduce our topic and guest speaker. Cecilia, take it away.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. Thanks again for all your coming. Today our topic is 2023 Real Estate Outlook and Economic Forecast. Our keynote speaker, Oscar Wei. He is the Deputy Chief Economist at the California Association of Realtors, that means CAR, a statewide trade organization of real estate professionals with more than 200,000 members. He co-manages the research and economic department and oversees the operation of data analytics and survey research within the division. As an economist at CAR, Oscar provides regular updates on the economy, state and regional housing markets, consumer behaviors, and public policy issues. On the economic, state, and regional housing markets, consumer behaviors, he provides a lot of public policy issues. Let me also introduce my co-host, Melissa, and she will do the intro and some of the other Q&A sessions as well. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so Oscar also has written articles and reports on subjects including housing supply, affordability, mortgage, finance, home ownership, tax reform, and other topics related to the real estate industry. He contributes frequently to CAR Weekly Housing Market Update newsletter, Housing Matters podcast, and the Housing Perspective. His work has been quoted in Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and Kimberlinger's, NPR, KFC, as well as other medias.
Oscar has been with the CAR since 2003. Before that, he worked for a toy company as an analyst to conduct research on identifying kids' trends and evaluate their global implications on the toy industry.
Oscar also has a bachelor degree in economics from University of California, Berkeley, and a master's degree in economics from California State Polytechnic University, Pomona.
Let's have a big round of applause to welcome our keynote speaker, Oscar Wei.
Thank you everyone thanks for the introductions, and thank you for the welcome. It's been a while since I think last time I was here was maybe about 5 years ago, before the pandemic. And I'm glad to be here in person. Some of you might have seen me at other speeches. If you have gone to the business meeting last week, you might have seen me around. But I'm very glad to be here, to be able to share some information with you guys. Rest assured, the information that I'm sharing today is different from what I shared last week, at the Global Forum, as well as I think I was at the Investment Housing Committee as well last week. So let's get started. I know this is a new year, even though it's already 7 weeks down the road already in 2023. We have a lot of things to cover. Let's get started. Let's take a look at some update first. Like usual, let me just make sure that there you go. As usual, I'll probably look at the big picture first. We're going to talk about the economy. We're going to talk about what's going on with the inflation and the economy and the labor market first, before going into the housing market. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to focus more on the big picture, fundamental stuff. Like I said, inflation has been on top of a lot of people's mind. This morning, in fact, there was an inflation element that was released. The CPI number was just released earlier today. You might have seen some fluctuation in the stock market earlier today. I don't know where it is right now, but it's it was up and down a little bit earlier today. At the same time, of course, that number provides some idea, provides some guidelines, guidance to where the Federal Reserve, what the Federal Reserve will be doing in the next time when they actually do the at the Federal Reserve meeting, whether they're going to raise interest rates or not. And then, of course, anytime we have any fluctuation or any concerns about interest rates, that actually affects the market. And the market actually has been actually pretty challenging for the last 6 months or 9 months or so, with interest rate rising pretty rapidly from, I think, at the end of 2021. You remember it was right around 3%. Right now, the 30-year fixed rate is right around 6.5 or so. And last time I looked at it, the average was probably right around 650, maybe 655 or so. Of course, that effect, that had been having some impact on sales, but also is having a little bit of impact on price recently. In the last couple months or so, we started seeing some slowdown in prices after it peaked maybe in around May of last year. So I'm going to talk about that in the middle section. Of course, I'm going to talk about not just the state number, but regional as well as some local numbers as well. And then, of course, in the last 15 minutes or so, we're going to put everything together, try to figure out where we will be going in the next 6 months, 9 months, maybe in 2024 as well. So let's get started. Let's first take a look at some economic update. Now, I know it's right around lunchtime, that's why I decided to show some food instead. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Another reason why I want to show you, that picture is because many of you probably know inflation has a lot to do with a couple of things that's pretty important. The energy prices, that's pretty, that has a pretty big impact on inflation. But food prices also have some impact on inflation. Now, I haven't been keeping track of prices of eggs. It's hard to believe that in the last 2 months or so, eggs prices have been the focal point. Who would know? But we have seen prices gone up pretty significantly on not just eggs but other food as well. If you take a look at, I know it's a little hard to read. I can't even read for myself. But if you look at some prices, I think the prices at the bottom, the light green, that's 3 years ago before the pandemic, and the price on top is actually the prices current day or actually at the end of last year. One of the items is eggs. I think was $1.48 in December 2020, and then of course at the end of 2022 it was $4, a little bit more than $4. But it's not just eggs. Look at all those other items. Food prices have been rising in the last 2.5 years or so, partly because of supply constraint, primarily because of supply constraint. And supply constraint has a lot to do with, of course, what happened during the pandemic. We have implemented, different countries implemented different protocol for manufacturing sector, for industry, for many different industry, and those protocols actually add on some cost, but also restrict some activities in manufacturing activities. That actually led to, now during the time when we were all closed down, when we had a lockdown, of course we did not have as much demand. But when demand started rising and we did not have enough supply to support all those demand, obviously, just like housing, right? When we don't have enough housing supply, but we have all of a sudden, a significant drop in interest rates to below 3%. Everybody rushed in, and of course, we had a lot of demand. At the same time, we did not have enough supply to support that, and home prices actually increased. Same for other items. Same for food, same for energy prices. Now, gas pumps, when we're at the gas pump, you're probably guilty yourself by, and you don't have to raise your hand, you probably have seen like $8 at the gas pump and you probably tempted to take a picture. Or maybe you took a picture and then shared it on Facebook. I think we have all seen that. And those are some of the items, gas, energy prices as well as food. Those are items that actually contributed to inflation. Now inflation, if you look at that chart right here, there are 2 lines. The dark blue line, that's the headline numbers. The headline numbers once actually got up to about 9.1% year-over-year change. That's only about, I think, July of last year, or June or July of last year. Now, just to have some sort of meaningful comparison, before the pandemic, typically for about 10 years or so, inflation rate was around 2.5%. So right now, or last June, it was at 9.1. It was had been rising pretty rapidly. Now, part of the reason also is, remember, about a year ago, roughly about a year ago, the Russia-Ukraine war started in about February or so. That actually pushed gas prices up to a very significant level. Now, in the last few months or so, gas prices actually have come down. Right now, it is probably at around $4.50 or so. Definitely not as high as what we saw about a year ago or 6 months ago. So it's actually coming back down, and that's why that blue line started coming down also. But it has come down from 9.1% right now. This morning, when it was reported, it was 6.4%. Last month was 6.5%. So it's gradually coming down, but it's not actually coming down fast enough. Of course, the Federal Reserve would like it to be at around 2.5% or so that people would not have to actually pay as much money to pay for all the consumer prices. And just to keep in mind, wage growth, I said, overall prices have been rising pretty significantly. Wage growth also has been rising, but wage actually has been rising at around 4, and latest I think it's 4.5%, 4.4% or so. So it's actually growing, but it's not growing as fast as inflation. That's concerning because if our wages are not growing fast enough to compensate for the increase in price, obviously that means our money is not actually as we cannot spend as much as before, and that's why we want to make sure that the Federal Reserve want to make sure that home prices, or not home prices, but overall prices actually will go down to a level that we can start being able to afford our daily expenses. And when you take out the green line is a line that is when you take out the more volatile item like the energy and food prices. Those numbers also continue to remain elevated at 5.6%. Now, like I said, it's coming down, but it's not coming down fast enough. And that's the reason why we have some volatility in the stock market today. That's because when you see the inflation actually remaining at a high level, that suggests to me that the Federal Reserve will continue to do some more tightening. The Federal Reserve actually have been tightening, and I'll show you in a minute. They have been tightening quite some time, and they probably will do so in the next couple of meetings or so, which is in March and May. Now, before I show you that, let's take a look at the inflation number and the expected inflation number. Now, I said it has been slowing down, and consumers actually are expecting the inflation actually to come down. Now, gas prices, even though it's recorded it has been coming down, but it actually picked up a little bit, maybe about early part of the year. It started picking up a little bit, and that's why gas prices actually rising a little bit, and that actually contributed to inflation actually not coming down as fast. People actually were expecting, as I showed you earlier, it was 6.4%. I think people were expecting maybe about 6.2% year-over-year increase. So that's why there is a little bit of a concern there. But consumers overall, their expectation actually has come down a little bit. Take a look at that blue line. That blue line is the 1-year expectation of what they believe, what consumers believe in general, overall prices are going to be. How much they expect to pay in terms of the overall expenses. They're expecting a 5% increase on their expenses in terms of inflation, which is higher than the 2.5% that they were accustomed to. But take a look at that trend. The blue line actually started coming down. It used to be somewhere around 6.5% or so. So it started coming down, and hopefully it will continue to come down and stabilize. But I can tell you that it probably will not come down to a fast enough level until maybe the end of the year or maybe 2024. Now, and that's the reason why the Federal Reserve have been raising rates. Take a look at this table. The column right in the middle, that's the rate change. It seems like a long time ago, but it's only about a year, maybe less than a year, that the Federal Reserve actually started raising rates. They started raising the Fed funds rate by 25 basis points in March of 2022. So they started actually hiking rates up quite significantly First with 25 basis point, then 50 basis point, and you can see, starting in June of last year, they started raising rate 4 times by 75 basis point each. All the way up to November, and then in December, they started seeing some results. As I mentioned, they started seeing the rates start coming down from 9.1 to 7 to 7 and to 8% to 7.5% or so. And so they started slowing down in December by raising it by 50 basis point. And the latest meeting, which was February 1st, just 2 weeks ago, they raised it by 25 basis point. By raising it to 25 basis point, the target rate, the Fed funds target rates on the right-hand side here shows you what the target range is. It used to be 0 to 2.25%. Now it is about 4.5 to 4.75. Now to kind of make some sense out of it, to see how it relates to the 30-year fixed rate, currently there's always, historically, the spread between the Fed funds rate or 10-year yields to 30-year fixed rate is about 180 basis point-ish or so over a long period of time. If you tack on quite roughly about 200 basis point, you'll probably get the 30-year fixed rate right there. About 650, 675 or so. Of course, there's some time lag, involved in between. But if you just want a quick calculation and see, how it compares, that's about 200 basis point. Now, it's about expectation. You probably have already heard from me before. It's not necessarily, the rate movement, the interest rate movement is about, expectation of what inflation is going to be, what the Federal Reserve typically will do. Now, if the bond market actually predict it correctly, they know what the Federal Reserve plans on doing, then we should have a smooth ride. Sometime it may be a little higher, sometime it may be a little lower. So a lot of people want to know, what can we expect from the Federal Reserve? What do we think, the Fed funds rates are going to be? I have 2 charts here. The chart on the on the far right hand side on my end, the one with the light blue bar, that's the odds or the probability of where the Fed funds rate is going to fall for the March meeting, the next meeting. The one on this side with the darker blue lines, blue bars, that's the probability for the May meeting. And people make predictions. The market likes to try to predict what's going on with Fed funds rate, where it's going to be, in the upcoming meeting. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the target rate right now, target range right now is 450 to 475, because it was raised 25 basis point. So take a look at the latest prediction, the one that I actually pulled up this morning, and that was right after the CPI number, the inflation number was released this morning. Take a look at the February 14, 2023 for the odds or the probability for the Fed funds rate target. About 94%, there's a probability of 94% that it's going to fall in the range of 475 to 500. What is the range again today? 450 to 475. What does that mean? That means many people believe the Federal Reserve will raise rate by 25 basis point next time. Now, there's still about 6% probability that they will actually raise it a little further to 50 basis point, to the target range of 5 to 525. But take a look at the 450 to 475, it's basically 0. So people believe that there's no way that the Federal Reserve will not raise rate. Chances are they're probably going to raise it by 25 basis point. I believe that is going to be the case. But what about May, the meeting right after the March meeting? Here's the predictions. If you look at the February 14 for the blue bar, dark blue bar here, 78% chance that they will raise the rate. Probably, let's say if they actually raise rates to 475 to 5, and that's a high percent chance. So for May meeting, about 78% chance that they'll raise it again by 25 basis points. Look at the difference between the target range in a 78% chance versus the 94. So that means there's a good chance that in May unless of course things change. And you can see, I have 3 different periods, right? You can see that those numbers actually change over time. That means people change their expectation over time, depending on the labor market information, depending on things about the CPI numbers and all those other things. So as of now, as of this morning, there's a high chance that, to make it very clear, 25 basis point increase in March, and then 25 basis point increase in May. Now, what's going to happen after that? A lot of speculation, and of course it depends on a lot of different things, but I think there is a chance that, previously I did not think that they will raise it again by 25 basis point. I previously thought 25 basis point in March and 25 basis point in May, and that will be it, and then they will probably leave it level. But now, we'll have to see. If they were to raise rate again, it'll probably 25 basis point again, but they're most likely not going to cut rate. If they do cut rate at all, it probably will be until the very end of the year. Now, the market though, bond market, they try to predict when that is going to happen, and the 30-year fixed rate probably will react before they're cut. So there's a chance that we probably will see rates start coming down towards the end of the year, but maybe not until in the second half of the year at least, most likely after the summer. You will continue to see some fluctuation though. Now the reason why they don't want to continue to raise rate too much is because they're concerned about affecting the economy. Whenever you raise the cost of borrowing, not just for people who are buying houses, but people who are actually, let's say, business leaders. They're cutting costs, they have to borrow money, and they use those money to pay for their expenses as well. Or credit cards. When we borrow money for credit cards, of course we have to think, if we don't pay back right away, then of course we have to be concerned about the cost that we need to pay for our credit cards. So people take that into account when interest rates start rising. People take that into account, and that affects the economic activity. Take a look at the economic activity, the retail sales number at the end of last year. The last set of numbers that we have is December 2022. Tomorrow we'll have another set of retail sales number released. I think early in the morning. It'll probably be a little soft, but take a look at the December number. Last year, at the year end, we actually had a dip. If you look at that very first line, retail sales on a month-to-month basis, it actually dipped 1.1% on a month-to-month basis. So sales actually slowed down a little bit towards the end of last year. And if you look at how it compared to a year ago, it actually still increased by 6%. Now that's pretty optimistic, right? 6%, that's pretty good. But that number, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because that number does not account for inflation. Yeah. If you account for inflation, take a look at that very last segment, the year-over-year percent retail sales, real retail sales number, it's 1.2%. That's this number right here in the last column. Now, 1.2% is still a positive number, but it is actually not, a very solid, very strong number. So in the upcoming months, we most likely will see, some additional slowdown for economic activity. Now, we would like to see 2 or 3% on a year-over-year basis, but as for now, we'll probably have to take that. Now, at the same time, what about other economic indicators like employment, like labor market? Now, unemployment number, that's the number that people pay attention to most of the time. Unemployment number, which is what I don't have here, unemployment has actually hit the lowest level that we have seen in the last 40 years. It's gone down to 3.4%. That's very, very low. Usually, a few years ago, economists typically believe the natural unemployment rate is around 5% or so. But we have gone down to 4, and have gone down to below 4% now at 3.4%. Now, part of the reason why we're seeing such strong growth is because if you look at that red bar or pink bar at the very end of that chart with the bar chart, it actually spiked up a little bit towards the end, towards the beginning of this year. It has been declining. You can see those bars on the left side of it started declining, And I actually thought that would actually decline. That number is the job growth number. How many jobs available, how many job increase available. It actually has been declining, and the Federal Reserve were pleased with that number because it has been declining. But of course, it jumped to, instead of the expectation for that number for January job growth was around 180,000 for the nation as a whole. Guess what that number was when it was released? It was over 500. So of course, after that number was released, people were concerned because that suggests to people in the market that the Federal Reserve might actually have to tighten up the interest rates a little bit more, because if you have a lot of jobs and not enough people to work, then of course wage growth typically increases. But at the same time, the number that I typically look at in addition to that job growth number is the number on the right hand side here. Those numbers, that's the wage growth number. That's how much wages have been growing. Now that number is important because I think they look at, the Federal Reserve, they look at those numbers too, very intensely actually. That number actually dropped to 4.4%. It was at 4.6%, I think it was 4.8 actually. 4.8% and it dropped to 4.4%, which means wages have not been growing as fast, which is what the Federal Reserve want to do. Now, I mean, in a perfect world, if we continue to have job growth and wages are not growing as much, that's good, because that means we don't have inflation, but we still have a solid economy. But right now, 4.4% is still a high number, so that's why the Federal Reserve will most likely tighten up a little bit more. Now, enough background about the economic stuff. Let's take a look at the housing market, because we have been seeing very high interest rate number. Interest rate at one point was at what, it was 30-year fixed rate was about 7%, right? 7.25% or so. Many of you probably have seen the number getting higher. And of course, buyers were concerned that it might actually even go higher than that. Now, but 7% for some of you who have been in the industry for a while, well, for some of you who have been in the industry for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 7% is high. Last time, in the last recessions, great in 2008, 2009, the 30-year fixed rate was what, 6.5% or so. But I bet someone in here probably have been in here for 30 years. I've been in the industry for 30 years. You have seen double-digit interest rates before. Some of you have seen interest, and at one point I think it was at 18% or so. But obviously, we did not have a median price of $1 million or 900,000. So, of course, that makes a difference. Now, interest rates makes a difference, and that's why it creates some concern for the buyer sentiment. Take a look at the buyer sentiment and also the seller sentiment in the next slide. This is the slide. These are numbers collected by the Fannie Mae. They actually put together a survey on a monthly basis. They ask, whether it's a good time to buy and it's a good time to sell. Now, some of you may notice that we used to have at the state level a good time to buy and good time to sell survey. We actually had to pull that survey out because of some technical difficulties in collecting data. So I'm going back to the Fannie Mae's number. Take a look at that blue dotted line. The blue dotted line, of course, went down, has been gradually coming down since 2020, partly because of prices, partly high prices, partly because of interest rates. But you can see towards the end, where the gray bar is, it seems to be actually picking up again. Now, of course, recently in the last month or so, it's actually dipped a little bit to 17% after it picked up to 21%. And that's partly because of some of the interest rate movement in the last couple of weeks or so. So there actually are, the buyer sentiment remained at a low level compared to where we were about a year and a half ago. And if you can see that the red line suggests, people still think, there is a way to go before the market is back to normal. What about sellers? Take a look at sellers again. Take a look at those blue dotted line. The blue dotted line, you can see that they look a little bit better compared to the buyers. About 58 or 50, what is it? 59% actually believe that it's a good time to sell. But you and I both know they're more than just the sentiment. People are not putting their house up on the market for different reasons, and I'll show you why. So there's a lack of supply partly because of, not just because of the sentiment, but also because of what's going on with the interest rate environment. Now, interest rates, as I mentioned, it's been showing some ups and downs. A few months ago, it was 7.5. At one point, it was 7.25 for the 30-year fixed rate. It has come down, but in the last couple weeks, it actually started rising back to 6.5. I think we dipped to below 6% at one point, probably mid of January or so, but then it started picking up because of concern about inflation. Now, more about that later on. But with high interest rates, what happens? The prices actually have not been coming down. Well, it actually has been coming down from the peak. But on a year-over-year basis, you don't see in many places, in many areas, you may not have seen significant drop, maybe 1 or 2% compared to last year. But on a monthly basis, yes, it definitely has dropped from the peak. The peak was, the state was 900,000. It's dropped down to about 780 or so. Some of that has to do with seasonality. Typically, at the beginning of the year, we have some seasonal change. And of course, the other part of it has to do with market uncertainty. But take a look at the reason. If you look at, I mentioned about cost of borrowing briefly, but not necessarily on the housing market. But take a look at that light blue line right there. That is the number, the change in percent in mortgage payment as compared to a year ago for a median price home. Take a look at that number. That number increased by 42%. Meaning, if someone were to buy a median price home, comparing this year and last year, they actually have to pay 42% more. Think about, in terms of dollar amount, if someone actually has to pay $2,000 every month for their mortgage, 42% increase is pretty significant, $800 or so. So all of a sudden, your month mortgage payment actually increased by a significant number. That's part of the reason why we're seeing some drop off in demand, drop off in sales because of affordability. And at the end of last year, and I apologize, I don't have January's numbers. The January's numbers actually will be released 2 days from now. For the state number, the regional numbers, I'm only showing December. But I actually snuck in some numbers at the city level, which just don't tell my media relation people, because she's gonna yell at me. Later on in the local statistics, you'll see some January's numbers. But take a look at the state number. The state, if you take a look at the December number, the year over year, it actually dropped 44%. That's pretty significant. Sales dropped quite significantly, and for the year as a whole, it actually dropped by about 23% or so. At the beginning of last year, it was actually still doing okay, but towards the end of last year, it actually started dipping quite significantly by 40-some% or so. Now, price, if you look at the price level though, it was at 774, which actually dipped compared to the previous year, but only by about 2.8%, 3% or so. I have to give you a warning though. Your buyers probably will ask you what's going to happen with price. I'm going to tell you this. On a month-to-month basis, we will continue to decline. 1%, 2% or so. When we hit April, the year-over-year percent change will be much more significant. Because last April, we actually saw a pretty significant increase in price, partly because of interest rates started hiking up and people actually rushed in. And in May, we actually set a new median price of 900,000. So when compared to the previous year, that year-over-year percent change is going to look bad. When I say look bad, you may actually see a 10% decline on a year-over-year basis, and people might think that's the end of the world. But on a month-to-month basis, in May or so, it actually could be plateauing because we are going into the spring home buying season. So from the peak to trough, and you hear that from reports from media, from newspaper, people will say, oh, it's going to drop 25%, but what they're referring to is the peak to trough level. The peak to trough level is the bottom. The peak was in May of last year. The bottom will be probably in the next couple months or so. Right now, so people might be concerned, buyers might be concerned about, oh, what's going to happen? So I can tell you this. I think someone told me before, or a news reporter asked me, okay, Goldman Sachs released a report saying that San Jose, for example, will drop 25% from peak to trough. And so a reporter asked me, so what's going to happen? Is it going to drop 25%? I looked at the number, I said, actually, I believe that report was correct. And I also told the reporter it's actually a very easy prediction because the December number compared to the peak was already down 23%. And from December to January, typically, if you look at the seasonal pattern, it will drop 1%. So yeah, it's safe to say that it will drop 25%, and that will be the trough. And then from that point on, it will actually climb. So the Bay Area, it's actually dropping a little bit more. So it sounds like it's, it's a significant drop, but relative to this point, it's actually not. It will continue to dip a little bit, but with interest rate actually started improving towards the second half of the year, I think we will end when we go into the home buying season, the prices usually tip up. So next couple months, yes, you're gonna see price decline. On a year-over-year basis, you will actually see that number rise to maybe an 8 or 9 or 10%, but you need to advise your buyers. Yes, it has been declining. In fact, it has been declining, but on a year-over-year basis, it dropped partly because of the surge in price last month or last year. Sorry. So keep that in mind. We are not going to see a free fall like what we saw in 2008, 2009. That's a little different back then. That's because we had a lot of supply. Take a look at unsold inventory number. The unsold inventory index is the supply, the months of supply. Historically, an average is about 4 to 5 months. Even in a downturn like what we're at right now, it is at 2.7 months. It's definitely is higher than what we were at, a year ago. But it actually has come down. It actually is still a decent number, and I'll show you that number shortly. Now, sales decline, as I mentioned, has been declining by 40-some%, but I have a feeling that the number actually will be improving. I look at the January's numbers that I told you earlier. If you look at that 44.1%, that's a significant number. But I can tell you that the number prior to that, you can see that if you look at the November's number, it actually dipped even more. I believe that's the bottom. From that point on, home sales probably will continue to dip on a year-over-year basis, but it will improve on a monthly basis. I can tell you that January's numbers, most likely it will improve in terms of sales, slightly, not a whole lot, and you'll probably see February's number increasing a little bit. I will be lying to you that everything will be back to normal in a couple months. No. Most likely it will continue to show some improvement, but it's probably not going to be very fast. So this year we expect sales to decline overall, but it's good to see some improvement. Now the improvement is different compared to what we saw about 15 years ago in the Great Recessions, and that is because it's not just because of sentiment. It's not because the economy is tanking. The economy is softening, that's for sure. But it's mostly because, not necessarily just because of demand, but not enough supply as well. I'll show you that in a minute. Now, and also, the other part of it is, if you look at the change between December and June of last year, you can see that we are seeing more drop-off in the high-end home. High-end homes, 2 million plus and 1 to 2 million, actually have been dropping a little bit more compared to what they were 6 months ago. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing some drop-off in price too. Now remember, when we talk about price, we talk about median price. Some people use average. When you have fewer homes being sold in the high end, that affects the price right in the middle. That affects the average. So that change in price is partly because of mix of sales change, because we have fewer sales at the high end. Median price definitely is slowing down on a year-over-year basis, as I mentioned. 2.8% decline. We will see higher. We'll see more drop off, and we have been seeing individual price tier actually dropping by 3 or 4% also. So that's going to happen. You will see, as I mentioned, higher drop off. Now here's the supply picture. On the surface, it looks like, wow, we have more months of supply. We have more inventory. And you can see on this chart here, towards the end, we are seeing 82% increase in inventory. Well, it looks like that's a whole lot of inventory. But remember what happened. Sales actually dipped by about 44%, I showed you earlier. So a big part of that is actually, a big part of the increase in active listing, they're carried over from previous month because they are not selling fast enough. But what about new active listings? Are we actually seeing more people put their house up on the market? Take a look at the new active listings. The new active listing, if you don't look at the blue bars first, look at the green line, that actually continued to decline. On a year-over-year basis, take a look at that number, it actually dropped 15%. So new listings actually dropped 15%. So if you look at the blue bars, you can see that very last number that I put up there, 8,866, that's the lowest, that's a California number, that's the lowest level that we have seen at least for the last 5-6 years. That's the lowest level. So if that's why I reiterate again, we're not going back to what we were at in 2008, 2009. Some of you were in business in 2008 or 9, you probably know back then there was a flood of property, REO, foreclosures, and probably short sales. We're not seeing that many this time around. The reason why we're not seeing that many, partly is because we don't have new listings. We don't have that many new listings, and we don't have new listings partly because of this. Take a look at this picture. This probably is very telling. Now I know this is actually a little outdated, but take a look at this picture. This was captured in June 2022. This basically tells you what the Freddie Mac portfolio is. Take a look at how was the percent of mortgages that they have under 4% or 5%. They have about 20% of their portfolio with mortgage rates between 2 to 2.99. They have about 63% between 3 to 3.99, and they have about 16% between 4 to 4.99. So about 90% of their portfolio, the mortgages that they have, it's under 5%. What is the interest rate right now? 6.5. Do you think people are going to just dump their property and finance with a higher mortgage rate? Most likely not. That's why they're actually holding on to their property, because it costs them actually to put their property up and actually buy another property. That's the lock-in effect. That's the term that we used before. Significant number, and it's probably going to continue on a little longer. And that's why when you have interest rate actually going down, it's not just a benefit for the demand on the demand side, because buyers actually can lower their costs. It's also the supply side as well, because if you actually have a low interest rate, people actually could actually put the house up on the market and actually resell their property and move on to the next one. So you loosen up the supply side and the demand side. But until we get there, it's a little hard to predict what's going to happen. That's why we think, demand side probably will continue. Sales will probably continue to stay at a low level for a little longer. Now let's take a look at some regional numbers. I put up, the LA, Orange, and all the 5-6 counties in Southern California. Safe to say, if you look at that blue bar, I know that there's a lot of blue bars up there, but if you take a look at the percent change, this slide here, it shows basically for the year 2022, every single county actually dropped, with LA dropping by about 26% or so. Now part of that is, of course, has to do with domestic sales. Part of it has to do with international sales. We have some, of course, because of restrictions on travel, international buyers actually have come down a little bit in terms of the demand. We may actually see a little bit more this year, partly because during the time when we actually have a housing downturn, a lot of time, the international buyers jump in to take advantage of, the slowdown in price. Of course, home prices have not gone down that much, so it's really hard to say whether that is going to increase significantly or not. Most likely not significantly, most likely it will increase, but not by a very high level. Now here are the median price, here are the sales at the end of last year. You can see at the end of last year, it's actually continued to dip. Now LA County actually dipped about 48% in December. I showed you that state number. State actually dipped to the lowest level in November. So what about LA County? Did LA County actually bottomed out already? Now, if you look at those numbers, LA actually is not the was not the highest the county with the highest drop. Riverside actually dropped more. San Bernardino actually dropped more. Take a look at LA County. I think the worst for LA County is probably over. If you look at the year-over-year decline there, LA County actually, this is a percent change in pending sales. This gives you an idea of where things will be in February or so. Take a look at the end of the chart. It actually dipped 33.1%. 2 months before, it actually dropped about 40–50%. So we actually have been dropping quite significantly, but the last couple months things actually bounced back a little bit. Still dropping, I'm not saying that it's not, but it looks like things are actually easing off a little bit, so it could look a little bit better. Now at the same time, prices probably have not dipped to the lowest level, as I mentioned. Next couple months we may actually see the bottom. For the year as a whole, we actually saw a gain for LA County, actually increased by 6% for the county as a whole for a single family home. But on a month-to-month basis, on a year-over-year for December, take a look at that number, it actually started dropping by 3.2%. Now 3.2% is not terrible, but as I mentioned, it probably will be a little bit higher as we move into April or so. So just be prepared, just to prepare to clarify to your buyer and to your client what's going on with the market. Of course, inventory-wise, 3.1 months of inventory at the end of last year for LA, still very tight, but take a look at all those other counties. They actually have been tight. Not a single one of them actually was about 4 months. So it's pretty tight, in terms of inventory, in terms of active listings. As I mentioned, the lock-in effect, it plays a role. Take a look at the year-over-year percent change. Every single county actually dropped in terms of new active listings by not just by 1 or 2%, by about 25% or so. That's part of the reason why we're seeing prices stay. Well, the silver lining is, of course, that actually prevent prices from free falling. It actually, tight supply continue to keep prices from falling significantly, but at the same time, it also restrict, sales. So sales will actually probably will be low for a little bit longer. And of course, with prices actually dipping not too much, but interest rates continue to rise, we actually have very low housing affordability level. The housing affordability level for LA, highlighted in orange, actually dipped to 13%. That number means only 13% of all households in California can afford to buy a median price home. In the ideal world, 50% of households in California should be able to buy the price right in the middle. But of course, this is not the ideal world. Even at the US, only 38%. So we are it's going to take some time. Now, these local numbers, I'm going to brief through them pretty quickly. What I have here are the 6 cities: Alhambra, Acadia, San Gabriel, Pasadena, and Temple City. There's one more. Monterey Park. Exactly. You can see this is the year end. This is the December number. This is actually, I should rephrase it. This is actually the December year-to-date number, meaning the entire year of 2022. Take a look at how they compare to the county as a whole. You can see median price for Alhambra continued to increase by double digit, but only for the year as a whole. At the end of last year, probably dipped a little bit, but look at sales. Sales dropped by about 10% or so. Inventory actually increased towards the end of last year. The other indicators at the bottom, those are market competition indicators that shows days on market, sales to list price ratio, and also the active listings, percent of active listings with a reduced price. Now, many of you probably have been using this. We actually have the year-to-date number. We also have the month-to-month, the monthly number. In a couple of days, when we release our press release for January, we will have the January numbers out. And again, you can go to the website, download that city level data, and share it with your client. These exist in PowerPoint format, in a single page format that you can hand out, and also in a PNG format that you can actually put in your Instagram. Acadia, similar story, but sales also dropped quite significantly, 24.3%. with price actually up by about 7% for the year as a whole. Inventory or active listing drop as well. Take a look at the sales to list price ratio for the year as a whole is actually at 100%, but I would use actually the December number rather than the December year-to-date number. So take a look at on our website. At the end, if I have time, I can show you where it is. Monterey Park, same thing. Sale price continued to increase, but sales actually dropped by about 11% or 12% or so. Pasadena, you can see sales also dropped 9%, and price actually increased by close to 5% or so. And active listings also dropped. Just so you know, this presentation will be on our CRO website also, in case you missed some of the slides. And I think some of you will probably be circling the slides. But at the end, I have my email address as well, so feel free to contact me if you couldn't get a hold of the slide deck. And San Gabriel also see an increase by 12% in terms of price. Home sales actually dropped about 17%, with active listings also dropping by about 0.4% or so. And Temple City, I think that's the last one that I have. Again, 20% increase in median price, 32% increase in home sales for the year as a whole, and in active listing actually increased by 11.3%. Now, those are the year-over-year. Those are the entire year number, December number. Now, these are the numbers that I'm not supposed to release, but they're here. So the January's numbers, it looks like this gives you a sense of where things are as of 2 weeks ago. At the end of January, you can see sales continue to decline. The dark green bar obviously look much smaller than the lighter green bar, and you can see the blue bars right there. Those are the year-over-year change in sales. So as of January, we still continue to see some dip in sales compared to a year ago. Temple City actually didn't dip as much. It's actually flat, but the other cities actually dropped quite a bit. Now, it's only the beginning of the year. I think February is going to pick up a little bit more, so you probably won't see a significant decline. But remember, the first 3 months of last year, of 2022, we did have a pretty surge in sales on a month-to-month basis, partly because of interest rates moving at a fast pace, and people wanted to get into the market sooner so that they would not miss out. Now, take a look at individual. This is the 6 cities that I combined together to show you a similar chart as the LA County chart that I showed earlier. This would give you an idea of whether things have bottomed out already. Unfortunately for Western Gabriel Valley, those 6 cities combined, it looks like on a year-over-year basis that blue bar continued to dip. Now that is of course just one data point, so it's hard to say. We did have it looked like things are actually getting back to normal, but then it started dipping again in January. So this might be just a glitch, but this does not show a similar trend as the LA County as a whole. So we may actually see a little bit more dip in sales in those 6 cities combined as compared to LA County as a whole. So it may actually stretch out a little longer for our cities here. But in terms of median prices, they actually most cities actually dip. Well, actually all cities dip. Some cities actually dip less than others. If you look at on a year-over-year basis, Alhambra dipped about 3%, but Acadia, the higher price cities, seem to have actually dropped a little bit more. It may have something to do with what I said earlier. The mix of sales change. We have fewer sales in the higher price segment, and that's why we're seeing the year-over-year drop a little bit more. And on the supply side, there's no question, most cities, or 4 out of 6 cities, actually dropped in supply in new listings. And one of the cities that actually increased quite a bit is Monterey Park, and Temple City actually inched up a little bit. So let's take a look at the outlook. First, of course, we need to know whether the most important question is about inflation. As I mentioned before, we have been paying a lot of attention to inflation. I think many of us have become experts in inflation in the last 2 years or so. But let's look at what the Economist said. this is from UCLA. UCLA at the blue bars, those are actual numbers. The red bars, those are the predictions or projections. Now, I'll have to tell you, the numbers, the red bars, actually were projected at the end of last year. So it might be, a little outdated. I think, the number may actually rise a little bit. But look at 2023 and 2024. Those are quarterly numbers. If you look at those numbers, in the first quarter, the red bar on top that says CPI, it's actually remained at 6.1%. That 6.1% suggests that this quarter, we will continue to increase rates or the prices, overall prices by 6.1%. But take a look at the end of 2023. It actually will dip to about 2.8%. So we will be actually getting back to the level that we were at, not quite there yet, but at least below 3% at the end of the fourth quarter. But by the end of 2024, we will be at around 2% or below 2% or so. That's encouraging. Of course, that also means that it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take about a couple of years or so. And if you look at that dot plot, the one with a lot of dots, those are basically the predictions of individual Federal Reserve official. They cast their votes. There are 18 dots there. They cast their votes every single quarter, every single time when they actually do a vote on interest rate hike. They provide some ideas of what they believe the year-end number is going to be. Take a look at 2023. Clearly, 2023 compared to 2022, it shows an increase. That means many of them believe, or on an aggregated level, all of them believe that interest rate will probably be higher. Not interest rate, Fed funds rate will be higher in 2023 compared to 2022 by the year end. And I believe that is probably going to be the case. But the encouraging part is from 2024 and 2025 on, things are actually going to move down. They believe they're going to cut rates in 24 and 25. So to be more specific, as I mentioned earlier, I think we will see rates increase, Fed funds rate increase in the next couple meetings, and then it's going to start leveling off, and then it may actually come down in 2024. Even though the Federal Reserve may not raise rates, it is most likely going to stay at an elevated level. We probably won't see 30-year fixed rate dropping significantly right away. Now, the reason why I believe they're going to stop raising rates is because the supply chain pressure actually started easing off. Take a look at the supply chain health. This actually gives you some idea of at a global level where the supply chain pressure is. The supply chain pressure basically is whether we have a tight supply and labor market, whether things are actually getting on the shelf faster or at a normal pace. Anytime that number, that blue line, is above the dark black line, that means things are actually still above the long run average. So it's taking a little, we still have more pressure compared to the long run average. But you can also see that that line actually is coming down quite rapidly in the last few months or so. So we're getting back to normal, but maybe not quite yet. On the other hand, if you look at the households, their concerns about whether they have money to spend, whether they think they will be financially worse off a year from now, take a look at this chart. When you add the orange bar and the blue bar together, that's the number of people who believe they will be worse off a year from now. That number or that chart seems to be coming down a little bit. Not a whole lot, still higher than what we saw in 1819, but that number is actually coming down. That means people are feeling a little bit more confidence about their finance, and when they feel a little bit more confidence about their finance, they probably spend a little bit more or feel comfortable spending. Now, but the fact is, of course, at the end of last year, we still had a slowdown. Even though it's an increase of 2.9%, the bar charts on the right, on my right-hand side, that's a GDP growth rate. It still increased by 2.9%, still a decent increase, but I can tell you that in the upcoming months, we probably will continue to see some slowdown. That's why tomorrow, when we release, when you see the retail sales number, probably should take a look at it and see, whether that number actually comes down, because that is a suggestion of where things are moving. The other part of it is, if you look at the saving rate, the personal saving rate, look at that green line, At one point during COVID, when we were all at home, when we were shopping on Amazon, and we were not going out, a lot of saving, we had a lot of saving. The first round of stimulus was issued in late 2020 or mid 2020 or so. People were saving about 35% of their income. But of course, that started coming back down. With the second and third stimulus, pushed up saving. But look at where we are at right now in terms of saving rate. We're saving about 3.5%, 3.4% or so, lower than where we were at in a pre-pandemic level. When you don't have as much saving, obviously, you're not going to spend as much. And people with different household income actually have different burdens. This is broken out into different household income segment, and you can see for the household with or individual with less than $50,000 income at the U.S. as a whole. In the latest survey, it seems to show that they're actually going to their income actually is not a high percent of them actually is spending more than their income, and that number seems to be trending up. So when people actually have when a bigger share of people actually have less income to spend than the expenses, obviously you will see more people coming back. And that suggests that things are actually going to slow down a little bit. Consumers, they still plan on spending, but they're not spending as much as before. A few months ago, people believed that they will have to spend maybe about 8 or 9% higher than what they're spending right now in order to survive. Now they believe only about 6% increase. So people do expect things to continue to improve, but they're also not expecting to spend as much. And it's not just the consumers. Take a look at business leaders. CEOs, they're also believing that recessions may be coming. Take a look at the chart, the horizontal bar charts on the right-hand side. It shows the percent of people or business leaders who believe we will be going into a recession. 86% believe we will get into a shallow recession, a mild recession. The other 7% believe that we will actually go into a deeper recession. So together we are making about 93%. But take a look at how it compares to the previous quarter. 98% in the previous quarter actually thought we would go into recessions. So that's a slight improvement from the 93% that we are seeing in this quarter is a slight improvement. But of course, we're still most likely going into the recession in this year. I believe these are the CEOs believe across the board at a global level. I believe we will probably get into recessions in the third quarter of this year, maybe a mild recession, and then maybe it will pull out in the fourth quarter of 2023. Most likely we'll get back to normal in 2024. Now here's the outlook. We're sticking with the outlook that we projected back in October. We believe that the GDP is going to drop by about 0.5% this year, after an increase of 0.9% last year. So it's a mild recession, and if you look at the very first line. Unemployment rate will still stay at a very low level. 4.4% is what we have right now. It may actually be a lower number than what we expected, but take a look at the CPI number. That's the inflation number. The CPI number actually will drop from 8% to a 4.4% average. I think that's a reasonable number to predict. And for California, I think California will do a little bit better, partly because we are a state that has a lot of services. We actually is a destination where we have a lot of travelers. So when COVID started, it's been easing, and we started seeing more people traveling again, and that helps the service industry, that helps the travel industry. We do believe that unemployment rate will increase though, probably to 4.7%. I'm wrapping up, just give me 5 more minutes. Now, market, what about the market? Now, it depends on the interest rates, it depends on inflation. As I mentioned, inflation is coming back down, and consumers, they do believe that prices are actually going to dip a little bit. Some people believe that prices are going to dip a little bit. Take a look at the home prices. On average, consumers believe that we will dip by about 1 or 2%, 1.4% to be exact. Well, that's actually not too bad. Not too bad. So if they actually believe prices will dip of course, some will actually wait. That's actually could lead to sales actually continue to stay at a low level. At the same time, some people also believe that interest rate will come back down, and I believe that is the case too. If you look at the blue dotted line, about 14-15% will actually believe that interest rates will come down. And so if they believe that interest rate will come down and price will come down, some of them probably will wait. Now obviously, they're not looking from the supply side. And that's why we're seeing some slowdown in mortgage applications as well. As of actually the end of last year, I think we started seeing some pickup in our mortgage applications in the last couple of weeks though. So mortgage applications started coming back up. That's partly because of what happened in the last few weeks, or a few weeks ago, I should say. Interest rate, as I mentioned, did dip below 3%, dip below 6% before climbing back up. And but the reality is, of course, properties are staying on the market for a little longer. So that's one factor that actually suggests that things are actually staying on the market for a little longer. Fewer buyers are willing to actually pay about asking price. We used to have 73% of buyers actually paying asking price, but the market is not as competitive as before, and so the buyers actually have a little bit more negotiation power. And going back to the interest rate slide, even though yes, we are above last year's level by quite a bit, but if you look at how it compares to the peak, we actually have come down. I don't think we will reach 7% again. I think it will be at around 6.5%, 6.25% or so. We'll see how it goes. Of course, you're going to see sellers being more realistic. More sellers are cutting prices. That's part of the reason why we're seeing prices actually come down. But you've seen this chart before. I updated it with the 2022 number. More buyers. We're not seeing what we saw in 2008, 2009, because people have more skin in the game. If you look at the number that I circled, back in 2006, 21% had zero down payment. Today, and in the last few years, only a handful of buyers actually put with zero down payment. In fact, in 2022, 3.3% with zero down payment. If they actually have equity, they're not going to put their house on the market and just dump their key back, send their keys back to their lenders. But at the same time, they are also not taking as much risky loans as before. But at the same time, they also lock in their rate, and that's a constrained supply. So here's the market outlook for California. We believe this is the year that we'll continue to have some challenge. Sales will drop. Sales will drop by about 7% this year. Price actually will drop by close to 9%. Now keep in mind the peak price. We have already seen the peak price. The peak price actually was last year in May. It has been dropping. So I think the blunt of the decline in price probably will be in the first half of the year. In the second half of the year, on a month-to-month basis, you probably don't see as much decline as before, maybe even an increase. So it's definitely something you need to explain to your client. Because this is the time when we actually can be trusted advisors as a realtor. Buyers and sellers, they listen to what's being put out on the news. Of course, as I mentioned, a lot of people, a lot of analysts put out information. Consumers may not be able to digest all those information, and so they need a trusted advisor. There are a lot of things that consumers need to some explanation on. They need to know about what's going on in the market. They need to know what kind of products there are out there that can help them to buy a home. They need to understand a little bit about all those economic noises that I just explained, and of course all the different financing options. What are some of the affordability programs that might be available to them. And of course, you're going to encounter buyers or sellers who will say, well, is it a good time to go into the market or not? Why is it a good time? There's no one-size-fits-all answer for buyers. It depends on who your buyers are. They may be first-time buyers, they may be repeat buyers. Here are some answers that you can try to engage with them and bring them back into the market. For first-time buyers, obviously, they need some additional funding. You can provide some expertise on some of the programs, affordability program, first-time buyers program for them. For repeat buyers, they may be tempted not to buy right now, but at the same time, they actually have the value, the equity gain that they have right now. So here are some different advices, some suggestions, but you definitely can come up with more. In the field, you definitely have more feel for the buyers and sellers. And again, at the end, the market is this is not going to be as easy as 2 years ago. Partly because it's something that we cannot control. Interest rates are still at a high level, and prices actually has risen to a level that it's not going to come down very, very fast. And so there might be some slowdown in demand, but it's going to pick back up probably in the second half of the year. And that lock-in effect that I mentioned is going to continue to lock up some supply. But when interest rates start coming back down, that lock-in effect will probably loosen up a little bit. Now prices will dip, there's no doubt about it. But if your buyer is if he or she is not flipping a property, staying in a property for 3 years or 4 years or so, then prices will continue to stay at a good level, and they can continue to build equity themselves. Inflation is going to improve. It's not going to go away completely this year, but it probably will continue to improve, which means rates probably will slow down. In the second half of the year, it will most likely go down a little bit. And in 2024 and 2025, we'll see a little bit more. And again, buyers and sellers, consumers, they probably need a lot of help to kind of understand what's going on with the market. That's why you're here. That's why I am here to explain some of the things. And with that wraps up the presentation. Here's my email address. I know I went over time a little bit, but thank you for inviting me again.
Let's go into the Q&A session. Do we have any questions for Oscar? Yes, let's get you the mic. One second.
Hi Oscar, my name is William Wei, and I'm one of the board directors here at the West San Gabriel Valley Realtor. I was a little lost when you said about the wage being low is good. Can you elaborate on that? And on the second question is, as of today, the stock market is reacting to the CPI, and a lot of the Wall Street people are saying that the labor market is going to be a really significant element to where the economy is going to go. Do you feel that, because you said that we're going to have a soft landing on the recession, do you feel, or what key element is there that if it's happening, then it becomes a hard landing? That was my question. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's explain the wage growth part. So wage growth at a slowing down is actually, it's good for the inflation aspect of it, meaning if wage actually starts slowing down, that means inflation is actually flaring up, and that also means that the Federal Reserve will not likely increase rates as fast, or maybe not as aggressive. Now, at the same time, you're right, wage growth doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing for consumers. Because consumers, if wage actually dip below, or continue to stay below the inflation rate, obviously that means people are not able to spend as much. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. From the interest rate perspective, yes, inflation, wage growth actually slowing down means inflation is also going down as well. Hopefully inflation will actually go down at a level faster than wage growth. At some point, hopefully wage growth will stay at around 3.5%. Inflation will go below 2% or so. That will be the ideal situation. And of course, interest rate will actually continue to, Fed funds rate will actually continue to stay at a level or maybe even get cut to stimulate the economy. But as of now, when people look at inflation, obviously they don't see inflation number every single month. So what they see is they see some inflation number, but at the same time, maybe 2 weeks later, they see some wage growth number that suggests what's going to happen to inflation. So with wage growth actually slowing down a little bit to 4.4%, that implies that inflation could actually slow down also. That means Federal Reserve will not be as aggressive. That's what I meant. From the consumer's perspective, it will be tough, of course. Obviously, in addition to wage growth, if we have food prices going down and energy prices going down, that will be even better. Now, as far as the economy goes, yes, it looks like, you know, with the report that came out this morning, the CPI number, inflation number has some the labor market has some direct impact on inflation. And that's why, you know, when the labor market get really hot, when we have some numbers like 500,000 job growth, that suggests that, you know, that the wage growth number could actually stay at a high level, and that could actually keep the market keep the inflation number from actually going down. And that's what I think some of the Wall Street Journal people were referring to. They have to look at the next set of number is retail sales, but retail sales may not play as big of a role in terms of the market. But they look at the labor market in the next report. If the next report comes out saying that, okay, well, instead of 500,000, we're seeing about 200,000 job growth, it's getting back to normal. But 200,000 is actually not a bad number. It's still a pretty solid number, but not as strong as the 500. So that suggests the economy is cooling off a little bit. The economists like to call a job market being solid, but inflation actually tame, as more like a Goldilocks situation, which means we may actually be able to achieve soft landing by not necessarily, we don't have to actually increase rates continuously, but let the economy kind of figure it out by itself. And when business leaders realize, okay, well, the economy is actually soft landing, they would not cut back on, you know, laying people off, things like that. So ideally, we could actually achieve soft landing. I have more confidence today compared to 6 months ago that we actually will see a soft landing, compared to 6 months ago. That doesn't necessarily mean that I believe we are going to see a soft landing. I think the probability is a little bit higher compared to 6 months ago. That's why I still believe third quarter we may actually touch soft landing. I hope I'm wrong, because if I'm wrong, that means, you know, we actually achieve soft landing, but at the same time, interest rate actually can go down a little bit more. So let's hope that is going to be the case. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for all this. Am I not?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. You know, I thank you for the optimism, because it really gives me hope. But what do we say to our clients when they see things on the news like consumer credit card debt is way high, our job employment numbers, even though it looks like unemployment's down, we haven't reached the level of employment that we had prior to COVID. There's just so many negatives that are out there in the mainstream. How do we counter those thoughts? And, you know, yeah, I understand the interest rates, but a lot of our buyers aren't concerned about the interest rate as much. And then we have LA City, you know, where prices with the, you know, being held down on our income properties, our rental properties, where landlords aren't getting the money. How do we counteract those ideas and concerns?
That's good questions. So it's true, of course. Despite the fact that, you know, I'm giving a lot of positive signs of where things are going. I mean, I'm still stressing the fact that I'm not saying that we're not going to have any challenges this year. As far as home sales is concerned, I've already shown that sales are probably going to stay at a level that is lower than what we saw last year. As I said, you know, 7% decline, and even price will actually drop by 9%. Now, in the short term, that's true. In the short term, we are probably going to actually go through some ups and downs. For your clients, for buyers and sellers, of course, they're going to wait. Some of them are going to wait. And that's why I have those messages at the very end. It depends. For people who are interested in buying right now, and if they have the capability of doing so, their concern, of course, is, am I buying at a time where prices actually will go down? Or am I buying at a time when interest rates actually are at a high level? Now, that's two questions. One is, of course, interest rates, whether it is at a level that is it's going to go down in 6 months or a year or so. Why am I locking in? Why am I buying right now? Well, my response to that is usually, you know, people can refinance depending on, of course, you know, how they actually purchase their property. So refinance can be an option in the future, you know, if rates actually start going down. Another question is, of course, whether prices are going to go down. If I were to buy the property right now, what if it goes down? then I'm gonna lose out maybe a couple $1,000s, maybe a $10,000 or so. The answer to that, of course, is it really depends on the consumer themselves, the buyers themselves. One way to look at it is, of course, if a property actually go down in the next 6 months in terms of the price, if a person or a buyer is actually holding on to the property for 3 years or so, they're probably not going to lose money. They're probably in the next 3 years or so, prices are going to go back up. So they're not going to lose the property value. But yes, they're not buying they're not timing that. You can say they're not timing the market right. But how many people actually can time the market right? You know, in either the financial market or the real property market. The real question is whether they are able to find a property that they really like. If they actually find a property that they really like, and if they have the financial means to do so, that might be the way to do it. But of course, I do not suggest people to flip right now. Obviously, for rental market, and I put together a rental market outlook actually last week that I presented. So if you're interested, send me an email to oscarw@cr.org. But my rental market outlook is also, it's not as hot. The market is actually not as hot as before. And you're right, as far as rental rate is concerned, average rent actually started coming down and softening up a little bit. Part of the reason why that is the case is we're seeing a little bit more multi-family homes being built last year and maybe a little bit more this year. And that's why average rent actually has come down. The demand side actually continued to be okay, but of course, we have other issues such as some of the eviction moratorium being extended and things like that. Those are some of the issues that, of course, we can talk a little bit more on afterwards. But as far as the rental market is concerned, yes, definitely it's softer, but it's actually not as bad. And when you explain to your client about, let's say, how the economy is doing, there's no sugarcoating. We probably will have a softer economic outlook than last year, but at the same time, those numbers such as unemployment rate, those numbers such as job growth, those are actually decent number. In fact, the unemployment rate actually, as I mentioned, has gone down to the lowest in the last 40 years. There are some people, and you will always hear, especially with the big companies, tech companies, like Microsoft or some of the companies, they're laying people off. There's no doubt about it, people are getting laid off. But at the same time, this compared to, we should be able to weather it out in the next year or two or so. If the Federal Reserve rate increase rates by only a small amount, by 25 basis points, I think the rate that we are at right now, the 675, that might be actually the peak. The next couple months or next few months or so, if inflation indeed actually starts slowing down, then we will actually see rates coming back down again. So there are a lot of things to absorb, I know, to digest. But feel free to contact me if you encounter any questions specifically that you want me to sort of help you with addressing it. I'm happy to do so. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sir, thanks for all this good informative presentation and analysis. I'm more of a pessimistic person, so I'm going to present the other side.
Absolutely, yes.
What I see, I'm looking at all this economic activities from big companies, Amazon, Google, Netflix. They are laying off a lot of people. Some of these people have their own business like we do. So I can see that could be a critical period, maybe later half of the year, because some of these actions might not precipitate through the third and fourth quarter, maybe even going into the election year 2024. So the housing market, my experience a hit, hopefully, as you said, I'm wrong. People might lose their home, cannot afford the mortgage. And if the Fed continues to raise the interest rate, whether it's 25 basis or 50 basis point, for them to buy some of these houses is still a little bit difficult. I'm afraid we might go into a short sale scenario. Hopefully that will never happen. It has happened before, and hopefully this time it won't be happening. I also see maybe a little bit uplifting in 2024 since it's the election year. Depending who the presidential candidate is on this economic plan, it might provide some buoyancy to the market. But for little people like us who don't make a lot of living and we rely on our $100,000 job to sustain the household's expenses, if one of the spouse lose a house and then we don't want to go into, maybe we go and rent an apartment to sell the house. So I can see some opportunity there, but otherwise I'm very pessimistic about this market as a whole. And as a builder, even the construction, in the construction industry, the new builders, the houses they are building now, they just want to let it go because they cannot carry on the cost of floating that property. So you might find some bargains in new constructions, but on existing house sales, if they are still competing with interest rates and the consumer looking for a bargain, it will be a toss up.
Well, that's a good perspective. I would say, of course, we want to look at things, from many different perspectives, from the more positive perspective as well as from the more negative perspective as well. Now, you may want to say that that's more realistic too, and I agree with you. The numbers that we are seeing, we have been seeing, and you're hearing things about, Microsoft, as I mentioned, the big tech companies, they have been letting people go, and that's very true. Amazon, big tech companies, Microsoft, Google, they're all letting people go. But if you look at so far, if you look at the job growth number, and I expect that job growth number to actually be a number that reflects what's going on with the market. But in fact, in January, we still saw, that number being a very high number, much higher than what economists expect. Instead of 180,000, it went up to 500,000. And the reason that could be the case is because, of course, it doesn't just capture the big tech companies, which are the ones that actually provide all the news regarding the big layoff. The small businesses, they probably still continue to hire, maybe not a whole lot of people at the same time. So when you work all those things out, I believe the 500,000, of course, is just a one-time thing. I don't think that number will sustain. It will come down. So we will see a slowdown in the labor market, that's for sure. And that's why we predict the unemployment rate to actually inch up from 4.4 to 4.7. So there's no doubt. Now, even if we actually see a slowdown in the economy, most likely, as I mentioned, we'll see a mild recession. And the reason why that is the case is if we continue to see retail sales actually at a level of, even though it's not improving, but showing, let's say, a 0% or even a 1% increase, that is actually sustainable. Now, there are other factors, no doubt about it. That's why I'm not ruling out a recession. I do not believe a deep recession, though, partly because, not necessarily just because I think, Federal Reserve can maneuver and actually achieve soft landing, just based on those numbers that we've seen. And you're right, we will probably if I'm not in Southern California, if I'm in the Bay Area, I probably will strike a tone that is a little bit more downgraded, because I know that their prices actually have gone down a little bit. As mentioned earlier, San Jose actually dipped in price a little bit more. Plus the fact that the financial market probably have a say on the houses in the Bay Area, because a lot of people actually have options. So I would say they probably dip a little bit more in terms of sales and price in the Bay Area. But if you look at the picture as a whole, right now, it seems like things are moving in that direction of softening, and hopefully, and again, that's a lot of assumption, and hopefully things actually will loosen up a little bit. As you mentioned, developers, builders, they're struggling a little bit because they want to get rid of some properties. And at the same time, this year we're not seeing as many single family being built. If we start seeing more properties servicing on the market, hopefully that will actually keep prices down. I'm not ruling out the fact that prices are going to go down. Prices probably will go down, in the next, couple months or next few months or so. But I don't anticipate the drop that we saw 15 years, just because, let me show you, throw out some numbers. Last time in 2008, 2009, 2010, the percent of foreclosure, REO or short sales, they made up about 50% or 55% at one point of all sales. Right now, in terms of foreclosures, in terms of short sales, in terms of the mortgages, only about, as of maybe about a month or 2 months ago, only about 3% of the mortgages were underwater. Even if we drop by 5%, that number may go up to 5% mortgages underwater. Mortgages underwater typically are mortgages that actually go into foreclosure or short sale. So even with a decrease of 5% in price, the foreclosure rate will not go up significantly. Now, it is very different though, of course, as you mentioned, if people start losing jobs, if a lot of people start losing jobs, then they cannot pay their mortgages, and then we will see some increase in foreclosure. But that, I would assume, would happen if we actually have the labor market being hit significantly. As of now, I don't see it being hit significantly. There are always some other factors like, if we have a financial market meltdown, obviously we will see more jobs lost. But hopefully we won't. We'll find out, later this year.
Thank you so much, Oscar. Let's give Oscar another round of applause. Thank you so much for the generosity of time and taking our 21 questions here. So now I'd like us to show our love together with Oscar and take a group photo. At the same time, if you're still interested in our little door prize, drop your business card. We'll do it after the class is concluded. We'll have your business card along with the door gift. All right, let's come together. We're going to take a picture just right along the front with a beautiful background, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Let me take it.
Yeah, please.